Former President Trump at a rally in Tempe, Arizona, where he continued to bash Vice President Harris's policies on immigration and the border. He touted his prospects for re-election, saying it will be the biggest political event in our country's history, that he expects to win big, in his own words. He went on to call the vice president pathetic. He also criticized other leading Democrats, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, doubling down on that anti-immigrant rhetoric that we've heard so frequently as he's there in the state of Arizona, critical in this election with its 11 electoral votes. Let's bring in our ABC White House correspondent, Mary Alice Parks, and ABC News senior White House correspondent, Selena Wang. Mary Alice, what do you make of the messaging we're hearing from former President Trump here, this closing arguments of sorts, this message of immigration, one that we've heard from him a lot? Not a lot of talk about his actual policies when it comes to immigration, though.
Yeah, that's right, Elizabeth. Look, tough immigration policies have been the cornerstone of his campaign since he launched his campaign. I do think it's worth a little bit of a fact check that this summer we do know that apprehensions at the border have sort of plummeted. I mean, we know that the Biden administration put in place this new very strict policy, cutting off someone's ability to claim asylum if they come between ports of entry. And so we've seen apprehensions plummet about 90% in some places. But nonetheless, of course, Americans remember some of those horrendous, chaotic scenes from early in the Biden administration when the border was flooded with migrants trying to cross. You know, I do think you're right that it is interesting. He doesn't offer a lot of specifics about what exactly he would do different than what the Biden administration is doing right now to have essentially closed the border. And he also hasn't offered many specifics on what exactly he would do when he says he wants to engage in mass deportations. I spent time this week, Elizabeth, talking to military experts, immigration experts about what it would cost to conduct a mass deportation effort across this country. Some estimates in the hundreds of billions of dollars, as you can imagine. Some members of his campaign have gotten into a little bit more specifics. They've talked about wanting to use the National Guard to conduct raids inside the country so that ICE officials could stay on the border, but the National Guard could conduct raids around the country. They've talked about wanting to set up detention camps. Stephen Miller, someone on his campaign, has talked about detention camps that could hold between 50 and 70,000 people on the border to try to go forward with a mass deportation program. But these are really tough questions, interesting questions about how Trump would go through with some of his immigration policies. On the campaign trail, it's a lot of talk and not a lot of specifics.
Fascinating, and something we've heard so much of him talk about, but not exactly clear how he would be able to do that if he does win re-election, what kind of support he'd need, and would he have that support in Congress as well. Let's bring in Selena Wang at the White House. Selena, we did hear the former president bring in a member of the San Diego Border Patrol up on stage. He continues to tout his support among those who want this harder stance when it comes to border policy. And yet, we also know that former President Trump directly lobbied against that bipartisan border bill in the Senate earlier this year.
And that's exactly the attack line that the Harris campaign is using repeatedly, which is that Donald Trump tanked that bipartisan border security bill, which would have included some of the toughest border security measures in decades. And it was also endorsed by the Border Patrol. And this is a line that Harris has been using as she knows that this is an issue that she's vulnerable on as Donald Trump continues to poll better when it comes to the issue of the border. Now, Harris last night during that CNN town hall, she was pressed on why it took the Biden-Harris administration until quite recently to toughen those border security issues with executive action. And Harris's response was that she was waiting for a long-term fix with Congress, not a short-term fix with executive action. But ultimately, the Biden administration did take that executive action to toughen those asylum restrictions. And I just want to read to you some data that's pretty compelling here, which is that the latest data from the Customs and Border Protection shows that since Biden announced those executive actions on the border on June 4th, illegal crossings have fallen by more than 55% to the lowest level in more than 4 years. But Harris is really facing an uphill battle here because despite what the data shows, there is a broad sentiment that there was a lot of chaos at the border, a mass number of illegal crossings during that administration, even though those crossings have fallen pretty dramatically.
And we do know that former President Trump has a clear edge on the vice president when it comes to the issue of immigration and the border. Selena Wang, Mary Alice Parks, thank you both so much, as always.